My name is Jon Forman. I am the founder of the Cleveland International Film Festival.
And I'm Hermione Malone, the current executive director of the Cleveland International Film Festival. So Jon, you started the festival in 1977. I'm really curious to know what inspired the first event, and why did you want to bring a globally focused film festival to Cleveland?
I was out of work and I needed a job. And the interesting thing is, when I was a student at Case Western Reserve University, I ran the College Film Society. We showed a wonderful selection of films that not only appealed to students but also appealed to the community. So fast forward, I graduate, had a couple of non-film related jobs, and one of the companies I was working for filed bankruptcy, and I was out of work. So a friend of mine who I met at Case Western, Alan Glazon, who helped start the festival, said, well, why don't you start a Cleveland Film Festival, which was, when you're 20-something, you figure, why not? So I actually traveled to New York City, went to meet the people who run the New York Film Festival, said, I have a great idea. We'd like to bring the best of the New York Film Festival to Cleveland. And they said, no, we don't share our name. We're not letting you do this. Why don't you do your own festival? So I came back very disheartened, and I said, well, try this festival. Glazon, who's a very energetic person, was very helpful. He really was inspirational. And we put together the very first Cleveland Film Festival with an all-volunteer staff. Was able to rent the Cedar Lee Theatre from its owner at that time, a company called Community Circuit Theaters. Burt Lefkowitz, who was a kind of a mentor to me, said, we'll do this. You can rent it 2 days a week, blah, blah, blah. And we had the first festival, which showed 8 films in a subscription film series, which was patterned after, at the time, the American Film Theater, I think was called, or maybe it was just AFI. And I said, well, that format seemed to work, so let's steal their format. Okay. And we did it over 8 weeks, 1 film a week for 2 showings each week, and it worked.
Were you at all surprised by the response?
Yes. I always said it was an artistic success because it paid all of the bills. I wasn't paid, there was no staff. Everyone who worked was doing it as a volunteer, and it was great. Festival ends, and give the keys back. Well, it didn't have the keys, but turn the theater back to the owner, and life goes on. At the time, I was offered the opportunity to be the press secretary, a job that I had no skills for Edward Feehan, who was running for the mayor of the city of Cleveland. It was a wonderful race, great experience for me. Edward lost, and I always said, had he won, and had I been offered a job in the administration, there would never have been a second film festival. So that was a little bit of backstory.
Good fortune in his loss for the rest of us.
So he lost, and I said, well, now we better think about doing a second festival. And we said, okay, 8 films was very good. The film director, Howard Hawks, died as we were preparing. So we said, well, let's do our regular festival, but then have a Howard Hawks tribute in the middle of this thing. So we almost doubled the number of films we were showing. The festival ends, and the owner, Community Circuit, was in the process of divesting himself of all their theaters in Cleveland, actually to the Lowe's Corporation at the time. Lowe's was not interested in the Cedar Lee Theater, so Burt said to me, hey kid, would you like to own a movie theater? And I said, yeah, it's a great idea. I don't have the money to do that kind of thing. He said, well, here's what I'm going to do. And he financed the purchase of the theater. It was very kind of him, although he was also a ruthless businessman. And he said, if you miss 1 payment, I get everything back. I said, that's fair. I have nothing to lose. So we took over the theater, and the rest of this is history. Last year was your first festival year, and I am certain, I'll let you say this yourself, that it was challenging just because new kid in town, new organization, the challenges of running at Playhouse Square. What were your greatest challenges coming on board last year?
So what I spent the first several months focused on is I always compare it to fixing up a house, where you've got to work on the plumbing in the walls or the electric in the walls or the foundation of the roof, stuff that other people can't see, that aesthetically aren't beautiful but are necessary. I think the organization had been doing things in a way that was really manual for a very long time. So spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how can we do this more efficiently, more effectively? How can we use technology that's available to us? So that helped to free up some time. I think as it relates to the festival, my goal was to sort of watch it and see where I could make changes or improvements the following year. But the one thing we did do from the very beginning is I wanted to listen to people. So I started the job in May. By July, I was having community listening sessions. I felt it was really important to understand both the perspective of people who came to the festival and loved it and the people who had never been or who hadn't been in a very long time. That really helped inform how we thought about a lot of components of the festival. And then throughout last year's fest, we kept surveying people. We got almost 1,000 responses, which is statistically significant given the audience size, but we used that feedback in so many ways this year to plan the festival. So I would say, obviously a big challenge is the thing that was placed in my lap when I was hired, which is that you've got to make the festival more operationally sound. We've got to look at the expenses, we've got to look at revenue, and figure out how to bring these things back in line. I remember you telling me that you all had this sort of philosophy of like, it's got to pay for itself. Yeah, and I think somewhere along the line, post-COVID, we struggled to get that expense in balance with the revenue. So that was really principally the biggest challenge. But yeah, I learned so much in that first year, and I heard from so many of our fans and members and people who are like, well, I haven't been, and here's why. In fact, one of the things we introduced last year, Shorts Club, is literally because I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, I like the idea of the festival. I just don't really have the attention span for, these full-length feature foreign films. And I said, there are shorts. And she goes, yeah, I think somebody took me to a short program once. I would probably do more of that. And I said, you should. There's over a dozen shorts programs. So we created this little club, and every event we did last year post-festival, the Shorts Club just about sold out, including the one we had here where we had to move to a bigger theater because there was so much interest. So
I've watched the growth of the Shorts program, and I'm amazed at the popularity, and it's a good thing you do it because otherwise these films would not be seen. I mean, the Academy Award has this category, and there's a program that goes around every year showing the nominees so you can see them for yourself. But other than that, there's no chance to see short films. So that was a wonderful addition. I don't know when that happened, but that's very smart. I also am aware, just because I, as a for-profit company, we live with challenges of trying to be profitable. Just because you're nonprofit, you have to run it and still
like a business.
have a surplus rather, not a profit. And that's been very hard. As I've watched the festival grow, my eyes are all saying, oh my God, we didn't have that kind of a budget. And I know that was one of your challenges, was to say, let's rein this in a little bit, make it more manageable, and also keep our expenses under control. I'm assuming that's been one of your challenges.
For sure, and it's only made more challenging by the fact that it's so beloved. Do you know, if this were the kind of thing that people were like, whatever, it would be easier to make some of these changes, but people feel deeply attached to certain aspects of the festival that make it a real experience for them. One of the things we sort of battle is the size and scale of a Playhouse Square, and how challenging it is to create that same sense of buzzy energy that you got at Tower City when you were like in those long lines in the hallway and you ran into like everybody that you knew, it seems like, and you get a recommendation. What did you just see? Oh my gosh, that's on my list. You're like, oh, don't see that one, right? And so, I mean, again, I think the fact that it's so beloved means that we take a lot of care in every decision that we make, knowing that for some people it'll have no effect, and for other people, it'll be upsetting, and we don't want to upset people. But there is a bit of a right sizing that we're in the process of doing.
I admire you. It's challenging. I admire you also for having these interactions with community members and festival patrons, because everyone has a strong opinion about something. And you're going to hear the good and the bad, and no matter what you end up doing, somebody's going to complain about something you're doing or something you're not doing. So that's a very good sign.
So I'm going to take you back to CIFF number one, CIFF 1. What do you remember about the movies that you screened? How many people showed up? Put us in the place in the time, 1977.
You're asking questions that are 50 years ago, but I will tell you. Because I used to know this offhand. And it frustrates me that I have selective memory now. I want to say there were about 8,000 people who came.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and again, the Cedar Lee Theatre was a single screen theater, capacity of just under 1,000 seats, and there would be films that would fill up or come very close. And if the film was showing twice, we would have 500 plus people at each screening, which is really kind of cool and very reassuring. We didn't solicit feedback; we got feedback from people, but the response was encouraging enough that I thought, this could really build something. Very important to say now that 50 years ago, 49 years ago, I had no idea the festival would be, I'd be sitting here with you.
How could
50,
you?
I mean,
Yeah.
or that it would be like this. I was invited somewhere year 2, 3, 4 to go to the San Francisco Film Festival because George Gunn, chairman of the board of the festival, also on the Cleveland Festival board, invited me to go out there to their opening night and see a bunch of films. I sat there on opening night. They had black tie, tables around. I mean, I was like, deer in the headlights. I just could not believe how this community, artsy, fartsy community, embraced the festival. And I said, this will never happen in Cleveland. Fast forward 50 years.
Ta-da.
While you don't have a big black tie event, there have been major events that are very similar, and I never envisioned that would happen for Cleveland. So I'm thrilled to see where the festival's gone. So you took over. What do you consider to be your greatest challenges going forward? You're 51 plus.
Yeah. So I think one of the challenges we have is that at some point, I think the festival stopped attracting in as strong numbers folks in their 20s and 30s to come out. And so we have a very loyal fan base, as I call a lot of our attendees. But they're aging, so they come out less, or they move to Florida. And so we've got to really do a good job of thinking about how do we attract younger patrons to come out and experience the festival. I think the other challenge is, frankly, the streaming that allows the world to come into your home. And so I've got to do something that pulls you off the couch, that prompts you to say, I'm going to get a ticket, I'm going to get dressed, get out of my house, stand in a line, And so for us, a part of that experience has always been the connection to filmmakers and principles and subject matters in narrative and documentary films. But I think there's like a push to create more experiences for folks to have in addition to seeing the films. So I would say that's a huge hurdle we're trying to overcome, which is to make this a must-see, must-attend event, to overcome the pull of, well, I got this really great TV and sound system in my house, and the snacks are right there, and I can pause it to go to the bathroom. I think that's going to be huge for us, and trying to get younger and more diverse audiences to see themselves as people who might enjoy a film festival. Film festivals can appeal to those aficionados, people who are sort of very passionately into independent film. And if that's not you, you just maybe like a good movie every now and again, you might not feel that it's a place for you. So we want everyone to feel welcome, and we want everyone to have an option of ways to experience the festival.
Well, if you figure out how to get them off the couch, let me know, because it's a challenge in the world of film festivals, also in the world of specialty theaters. It's really very frustrating and difficult. So, but I think that is a great challenge. One of the things I think the festival has done that I admire is, I don't know who started this, but bringing in more and more of the independent filmmakers and making this more an event, to use your words. I think people do respond to that. They love to do a Q&A afterwards.
We've heard from people who have what they call festival friends.
Yeah.
So they are people they see every year at the festival. They don't actually hang out with these people throughout the balance of the year, but they look forward to seeing them every year at the festival. So we know that the bringing together of people is really powerful, and we also know that getting all of these diverse perspectives of the world, of issues, is important. There are people today who can point to a singular film they saw at CIFF that transformed how they thought about a people, a place, an issue. And so that's always the dream of ours, is that it stays with you.
It's fun. I often felt, because I didn't have the good fortune of traveling until much later in life, that I would see a movie from France or Italy, and I thought, oh, I got to experience another culture, but it was limited to on the screen. It's really nice to do it firsthand. But I think the festival films allow you to do that as well. But I don't want to suggest that watching a movie about a country is as good as visiting that country. last year you had a very successful film, Lost and Found in Cleveland, which was a record-breaking film for the festival. Why did that work? What was the appeal besides the fact that it has the word Cleveland in the title?
Well, that's a lot to do with it, I think. One of our programmers said, Clevelanders love a film about Cleveland. So whether that's sports or whether that's a setting in Cleveland. But the other thing I realized is how much of the community was involved in some way in the making of the film. So I saw a woman I've known for years in the line, and I said, "Oh my gosh, so good to see you here." She's like, "They shot in my house," So there were people who were there who had, sort of like hands in or tentacles in to the making of that film. Whenever Cleveland can show up in a way that's in the spotlight, that looks great, is shiny, they want to be there and be a part of it. And so I also think the filmmaking team did a really great job of engaging Clevelanders, to come out to see that film as well.
I know that one of the great challenges for programmers today is to try to get, those A-type stars to participate in the festival just because the demands are so great or the requirements to show up cost money and first-class travel expenses and traveling with their hairdresser and the dog. It's very hard. But I know that people love to, interact with a real-life star.
I'm laughing because somebody asked us about bringing their hair and makeup artist this year. Okay, so we're going to jump from the Cedar Lee to Tower City. You oversaw that move where it sat until it most recently moved to Playhouse Square. What stands out for you about the festival during the Tower City years?
The move to Tower City was very controversial. The staff at the time, had the good fortune of working with David Witkowski and Marcy Goodman, and we went to a board meeting, and the board voted to move to Tower City. I'm not sure if it was initially in full or in part because Tower City Center was just opening. Hoyt's Cinemas had opened up this fancy state-of-the-art theater and made it available to the festival. And there were some board members who very strongly felt we should do this. And I said, we're not ready to make this move. Board says we're going to do it. And so David, Marcy, and I said, okay, we're going to give it our best shot. And we moved, and it was a qualified success. It was very ambitious. We did much more limited programming in the first year than what followed. So many people said, I'm never going to the festival again because I'm not going to go from Cleveland Heights down to Tower City and worry about my car being stolen and all some nonsense. Those are pretty normal reactions. I think change is very difficult for people, and I hated the fact that people would say that you get a little defensive. Anyway, it worked. It worked well enough that my successor, David, and then Marcy after him, kept building on this thing, and it just kept growing and growing to, I think your biggest number at the time was 100,000+ patrons attending.
105.
Yeah, it was amazing. And the dynamic of the two hallways being chock full of people and people planning their day, staying at the Ritz-Carlton and spending several days going to movies, I thought was amazing. I just loved walking down the halls. I couldn't ever watch a movie because I get too anxious when I see the exit sign is out or there's dirt on the floor. But walking in and listening to the crowds respond and seeing what they're watching, it was amazing that it really worked. And I like the fact that as much as I love the Cedar Lee, the proximity to the west side, south side, and east side made Tower City such a natural fit for the festival when you're trying to draw all these audiences. And for those people who like public transportation, rapid transit's right there. You're bringing guests into the airport, you're right on the rapid transit. So it was great. And I think the growth that took place there was phenomenal. But for the pandemic, had that not interrupted the festival and basically life in general, the festival may have continued to grow staying at Tower City. It came to a screeching halt, obviously, and festival, just like many businesses, really had a pause. I think you introduced streaming at that time, and that was, modest success because people like what you just described, the interaction with other people and with filmmakers. You can't do that online. But the festival move to Tower City was phenomenal, and I think never saw the numbers, but I think the challenge of doing it was justified by the fact that it covered, I think, the operating expenses. I could be wrong, but
largely yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure. And I think that one of the things that Tower City also provided people was this way to sort of hang around a bit. You know, you had the food court, you had the seating area. So even if you weren't immediately going right back in, there's a place where you could sit and kibitz, you know, about what you were going to see, what you had seen. So yeah, it was a very unique venue, and I could see why people loved it.
And a wonderful hospitality suite. I thought it was a great arrangement. And I realized, and I said this at the time to David, to Marcy, that the audience was spoiled because it was very easy to participate and not move around, not have to worry about parking 3 times or going back and forth to home. It was great, and nothing's wrong with it. I think you don't have to challenge the audiences on anything except for the films they're seeing, not on the logistics. So that was great. You know, it couldn't last forever, but you know, it was successful while what happened. And speaking of downtown, I know that this year you're using this screening room at Cleveland State University. What's the collaboration? How are they involved, and what are you exactly doing?
Yeah, so CSU's film school actually sits right next door to the Playhouse Square theaters, and we've often had them kind of collaborate around programming for their students. So is there a way to connect filmmakers to students for, you know, panels or labs or things of that sort? We do have a board member who is with the film school, and so she's always looking for ways to improve that collaboration. Last year's students from their program came up with our street team concept. So while we had our photographers bopping around, the students were also there getting video, getting great interviews. Like I know they interviewed Marley Matlin and Shoshana, who was the producer of that film last year, but adding kind of a like an edginess to the content, so it was less about being polished and perfect and more about being like on the ground experiences. So that's a great thing we're going to continue this year as well. But also, you know, part of what I think we're challenged to do is think about what the future of storytelling looks like. And I know there's angst about, you know, AI, for example, but I remember being at the Toronto Film Festival last year and a filmmaker pointing out how useful it is to actually unlock people's understanding of what you're trying to do with the film. So in his example, there was a shot he needed, and it was going to be an expensive shot. It was aerial, you had to clear streets. And the producers were like, we're not paying for that. So he created the shot using AI. And he sort of inserted to say, this is the effect of this shot. If I don't have it, this is what you get. And they were like, here's the money, you know, get the shot, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon us to always think about what's coming up next, micro content, these little short dose series that show up on social media and other platforms. And so partnering with a university who has a focus on the film arts is really one way for us to start thinking programmatically going forward beyond just the festival. What does it look like to show up in a big way and support the film arts community here? And how can we do it with our eye toward what's coming and not just sort of looking back at, you know, at what was?
I'm intrigued and pleased you're doing that kind of stuff because I think, you know, people kind of poo-poo sometimes the film scene in Cleveland, but Cleveland has the Cinematheque, it has the Case Western Reserve Film Society, it's got what's going on at Cleveland State. I operate a theater out in Oberlin for the Oberlin College, and they have their own film society, and I'm surprised and delighted that people turn out for that. So I think there's a very strong interest in filmmaking by students today because it's so easy. Take like these cameras here. You can make a movie with a camera. You don't need all the fancy equipment that used to use 35 millimeter and IMAX. Yes, that still exists, but it's so easy to do something on a modest scale. So that's great to involve a filmmaking community. I think that's one of the, I don't know what when you visualize the festival going forward, where you may go, but I think the fact that you're incorporating this student component is really a very good idea.
I think we're one of the few festivals that doesn't have either robust year-round professional development training or operate a theater. So it puts CIFF in this really interesting space and at this particular point in time to think about what do we want our work to look like? What do we want a festival to symbolize? What does it look like for a festival to exist in the community beyond just 10 days when we're showing movies on screens, right? And so I think that's a little bit of our challenge and our focus going forward is evolving this from being just this thing that's happening at a point in time to how can the festival have a presence in the arts and culture scene in Cleveland throughout the year. And I think critical partnerships like that with CSU are going to be a big part of that. All right, I'm going to make it easy.
Good.
Jon, what's your favorite film that you've ever seen at a CIFF?
You know, at a CIFF. Boy, that's a tough one. See, I need to pull out my little cheat sheet. You know, I just recently rewatched this F for Fake, the opening night film from the very first festival, and I thought, oh my God, this is not that good. And then I saw people said that was one of my favorite films. So when the executive director would pen their letter to go inside the program booklet to welcome people to the festival, you were often asked, what is your favorite film? And I would say that's really not a fair question, because what is my favorite comedy? What is my favorite drama? What is my favorite international film? There's a charming, well, it's a very hard question. I don't know if I have a favorite, because they're all over the map. If I'm being like a typical parent, I'll say they're all my favorite.
They're all my favorite. You know, I actually have a favorite. It was in the Tower City years, and I tend to over-index on documentaries. And documentaries can be great. They can be like uplifting and heartwarming, but like 60% of the time they're gonna be like sad. So I had watched a slew, I don't know, like 13 movies in a day or something crazy. And I was the last film, and I was like limping to the like final film, closing night. And it was Bill Cunningham, New York. That delightful documentary about the New York Times fashion photographer. And it was like such a spirit lift, and a real cute peek inside, you know, how he works and how his eye, you know, is so drawn to certain things in fashion photography. So that is one of my all-time favorites, but also because it came after like a ton of sad documentaries. Jon, this was really great. Thank you for that. And I hope that everyone comes out and joins us April 9th through the 18th for the 50th Cleveland International Film Festival. It'll be happening here at the Cedar Lee Theatre, as well as CSU School of Film and Playhouse Square. So we hope to see you there.